Hey friends, it's Jennifer. I hope you guys are doing well. In today's video, we're going to talk about borders and edges on your journal pages, like the ones here. You can see from the side view here that they have some decorative edges. And the first obvious one is going to be a paper punch. I've had this one for a long time, and I just gathered up some papers that are going to go into a journal, and I just wanted to show you some different ideas on what to do for the decorative edges on your journal pages. But this one is fairly simple. You just punch out obviously the edges of your paper, and it creates a decorative edge like you can see here. And I like to ink mine to make them stand out a little bit better. I like to ink them on both sides when I do my edges and my borders. I like for them to look good from both sides, so that's why I'm inking it on both sides. The second one is just a scrapbook tear out scrap that I have. And what I'm going to do is just take this edge and I'm going to ink around it, and I'm just going to glue it down to a piece of paper. And you can see I started out by kind of thinking about where I was going to put it. I wound up sewing this on my sewing machine, but I wound up just putting it at the top of the page, which left a little gap at the bottom, which is okay because I had another little scrap of paper that I just ripped down to size, and I inked and I sewed it onto the page as well. And so you can see, really, you can use anything that you have to make a beautiful decorative edge for your journals. And you can just see I'm trimming the threads here, but at the top, I just decided to leave these. Another way, obviously, is you can just sew around the page with your sewing machine, like I've done here. You can pick out a stitch. This is one of my favorites on my sewing machine, and I really like that. Another idea is just to take another piece of scrapbook paper. The first one we tore into a couple of pieces. This is just one whole piece. I like to tear my edges. Of course, I ink around everything. You can ink around after you've got it down, but it's kind of hard to after that. And so I'm just using regular school glue, and I'm just going to glue it down. Now, another idea I like to do is use crochet pieces. I have a lot of scrap yarn. I do love to crochet, but sometimes you just have a little left over from a project. And so what I'll do is just sort of measure out a piece and go ahead and take that yarn and crochet up like a decorative edge. And I just use regular glue just to glue them down, but that's a really good way to use up your scrap yarn, and it doesn't take a lot of time if you're a crocheter. And you can see I'm just going to pin it down with some sewing clips. And I always like to turn it over and make sure it looks good from the back side, um, and straighten that up. But glue will hold down your yarn really well to your paper. I do this quite often, and I love this because it's a way to use up your yarn and make a pretty edge. Now I've got some fabric here. This is scrap fabric, and I've got this striped piece of scrapbook page, and I'm thinking that this will look good. But what I'm going to do is just rip it into strips. All of these little scraps here, just tear them into strips, and then I'm just going to arrange them onto the paper. And I'm just trying to arrange the first piece of fabric, and I'm thinking this is too long. So I'm just going to go through and rip up this green into some smaller scraps here. The pink is not as long, but the green was. And so now I'm just sort of laying them out there, and I'm just using regular school glue, and I'm just gluing them down. And I'm just going to continue on down the side of the page, gluing them down in different directions, just whatever I feel like at the time. And here it is. And I'm just going to take this to my sewing machine and sew down the edge of it. And so here's the finished paper. It looks really good. I could probably take this and trim it down if I needed to with my scissors, but I'm not going to do that right now. Another idea is ruffled paper, or in this case, it's book page. I usually just make a bunch of this up at one time. You can see I've got quite a bit here. And I just measure out what I need, trim it off, and glue it down. And this is just paper that I've taken over to my sewing machine and just ruffled it under my sewing machine. And I just do this all at one time in a big strip, and I just keep it for whenever I want to use it. And you can see I'm just going to pin it down until it dries, but it also makes a great decorative edge there. Another idea is lace. A lot of times I will buy lace on a clearance. You know, they'll just have just a little bit, and it's just enough to make an edge there or a decorative border. I'm just using my hot glue gun, and I'm just gluing it down, and you can see it looks good from both sides. I love using lace or bit pieces from clearance racks. It's a great way to use them in your journals. Another idea is to use shapes of any kind. In my case, I love circles. I have a ton of circle punches, but you don't have to use a punch. You can use squares or you can use triangles. If you don't have a punch, you can use you can just cut out whatever you want. You can actually cut out circles. You don't have to have a punch to do this. But usually when I make a decorative edge, I like to make sure it looks good from both sides, and shapes are a great way to do that. But I like to use double-sided scrapbook paper or my tea-dyed paper. It's tea-dyed on both sides, obviously, and so it looks good from both sides. And so I like to, if I'm not going to be able to use a piece of paper that's got a decorative backing, then I will make double the circles and glue them together so it will look good from both sides, making the decorative side look good as well. And you can just see that I'm just going in here and I'm just gluing down the circles, just arranging them like I want. And I'm going to take this to my sewing machine. Right here you can see I did. And just did a stitch down the side. Another good idea is to use trim. I bought this in a pack. Again, this was some kind of little hobby pack, and it just came with all kinds of little scrap pieces of trim, like this, gold and green. It's not my favorite, but I'm just showing you this for the video's sake, like that it came in a pack. But trim is always usually got a decorative edge, or it's got something that's already pretty on it. That's what makes it trim. So I'm just going to use this piece, and I'm using hot glue here because it was available and hot glue sticks pretty easy. And I'm just gluing down this piece of trim, and trim looks good from both sides. So you can see it's the front side and the back side. It just looks gorgeous, and it's really simple to use. So always be on the lookout for little pieces of trim. Another idea is just scrap fabric. I have this piece, and yes, it looks crooked and crazy, but I think I have enough that will fold over to the back side. So what I'm going to do is just sort of measure it up, cut it off, and I'm just going to glue down one side on one piece of the paper, and then I'm just going to turn it over and glue it down on the other side. But just making sure that I don't glue it down to the paper's edge. That way it will stick up beyond the paper whenever it's in the journal. And so you can see me doing that here. And I'm just going to allow it to dry. Glue has become a really hot thing for quilters to use because it dries pretty clear. Another thing is just ribbon. I got this on the clearance rack, and it's like a, I don't really know, it's like a sheer organza type ribbon. And so I love using ribbon in my journals because it's already pretty much decorated. And so I'm just going to glue it down here. And again, glue is a good way to get your fabric down. Anyway, I just took it to my sewing machine and sewed around the edges of this as well. Another thing you can do is just take another piece of paper, cut the edge off of it, punch the holes in the decorative side, and then sew it down to your paper. And you get a two-toned paper with a decorative edge as well. Here I'm just taking little scraps of paper. These are paper. That, of course, is fabric that we used earlier. But I'm just going to take a couple of pieces of that and tear it into squares. And I'm just going to take a sheet of paper, and I'm not even going to measure it out. This is crepe paper that I got in a discount pack. So I am using hot glue to get it down because regular glue wasn't holding it. But I'm just going through here down the page and just picking out pieces of paper and just gluing them down to the edge. And here it is completed, and it looks really good like this, but I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew down the middle of it. There it is. I just use a zigzag stitch, and it looks really good from both sides. This wound up being my favorite. Again, obviously, I'm going to use a piece of scrapbook paper. I'm just going to trim up the side, and I'm going to do this like I did with the fabric before. Glue it down on one edge and fold it over, but don't fold it over completely to the other side, to the edge of the paper. Just fold it over enough where it sticks out in your journal. And then I'm just going to trim off the edges there. And you can see this makes the perfect border edge for it. You can also use dryer sheets. I love using used dryer sheets. I usually dye them. This one's not dyed, but you can use anything that you have. I have some feathers here that I've always wanted to use. I have mosaic tile pieces. You can use sequins, beads, anything that you can fit into on the edge of your journal, you can use. But I wanted to use these feathers for a while, and so here I am just taking my hot glue gun and I'm just gluing them down on the edge. And I'm just using my metal tool to hold them down until the glue dries because I don't want to burn my finger, which hot glue dries pretty quick. Um, and so I'm just going down the edge here and I'm just putting these feathers down. And here it is. Got feathers everywhere now, but I love how this turned out. It's very soft to the touch and it looks good from the other side. And I'm really happy with the way this one turned out. And so here are all of the pages that we just did. I'm going to go through and show you each one, but you see how they look. So here is the sewn paper. Of course, the feathers. The two pieces of scrapbook that we put together that we ripped. The ruffled book page or paper. The crocheted edge. the one piece of torn scrapbook paper there, the ribbon, the punched edge there, you can see that. This one wound up being my favorite, the scrap paper and fabric piece. The lace, and I took that to my sewing machine and sewed around it, you can see there. The shapes, which in this case was the circles. The trim edge, which I loved. The fabric edge, which I took to my sewing machine and sewed down it as well. The scrapbook piece, which I sewed on my sewing machine. The scrap fabric piece, which is right here. I love it. And then, of course, the sewn edges on the back side. I leave all my sewn edges on the edge just because I love that. And I hope this gave you some inspiration to complete some borders in your journals and edges. Maybe hopefully gave you some ideas. I'll see you the next time.